Behind me, I have my 2004 Mazda RX-8. And I have to say that I have absolutely loved owning this car for the time that I have. Creating all the content and videos, sharing my personal experience with the car, and hopefully helping the world understand that these cars aren't as terrible as they're made to be. It's been super cool to see the response from all those who have been watching since the beginning, and especially through the build series of this car and seeing their reaction, and even as far as some of you going out and buying your own Mazda RX-8 because it convinced you, which I think is absolutely crazy, but super cool to see. And while yes, we've talked a lot about the good things and the misunderstood things of the Mazda RX-8, I think it's still important to talk about what makes these cars different. And yes, maybe some reasons why you actually don't want to own a Mazda RX-8, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So before we go ahead and get into all that, please don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed. It helps out a ton. So without further ado, let's get into it. One of the first reasons you may not want to get into a Mazda RX-8 is because unfortunately, just like everything else, they're not as affordable as they once were. The prices of these cars have gone up quite a bit throughout the last few years, and I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. And one of the problems that go along with that is that these cars are actually getting harder and harder to find in really good condition. I mean, we're talking about cars that have been on the market for almost 20 years. My 2004 Mazda RX-8 is approaching 20 years old, which is insane. Which means that these cars have had a long time to rack up some history behind them, whether that's a handful of owners, a handful of engines, accidents, and who knows what else. And even in some colder states like here in Wisconsin, where we put salt on the roads and they're exposed to elements a lot more, rust is a huge issue with these cars. And a lot of the times you're not going to realize that rust is an issue until it's too late. So ideally, what you're going to want to do is go find an RX-8 with as low miles as possible. However, that usually means that there's going to be a higher price tag attached to it. And while yes, there are some low mileage RX-8s out there and about and available for purchase, the unfortunate thing with these cars is that just because it has low miles doesn't mean that you're clear to go and that there's not going to be potential issues down the road. Which brings me to reason number 2. If someone were to create a list of cars ordered by importance of how they were treated in the past, the Mazda RX-8 would damn near be the top of that list. And what I mean by that is that the overall longevity and actual reliability that you're going to get out of these cars and their engines is so reliant on how they were treated since they were new. And unfortunately, the only way you're going to come across that information is if you find someone who bought the car brand new, they're the one owner of the car, and they know rotary platforms and they knew how to take care of it. Because there's a lot of factors that can have some detrimental impacts on the overall longevity of these cars. Was it ever flooded? Has it ever run out of gas? How often was oil changed? Was it pre-mixed? If so, how long has it been pre-mixed for? How often were the spark plugs changed out? Just a ton of stuff that can impact the overall lifespan of these cars pretty significantly. And really only the true way to tell if you're getting behind the wheel of a ticking time bomb or not is to have the engine compression tested, which may not sound like that big of a deal. A compression test can be pretty easily done. However, you're gonna have to have the right tool for a rotary compression test. And it's kind of just an annoying thing to coordinate with the seller if you're looking to buy the car. It's just an extra step that you have to take in the process. That's a bit of an annoyance. Either way, if you do find yourself behind the wheel of a Mazda RX-8, you have to be ready and you have to be okay with a more than average amount of preventive maintenance. Regular oil changes are extremely important, not only just to keep new, fresh oil in the engine, but to actually just keep oil in the engine, as these things do rely on injecting and burning oil to lubricate the seals of the engine. Pre-mixing is one way to give some peace of mind, as it's a way to always ensure that the seals are being lubricated. I would also highly recommend doing it, as the RX-8s are known to have their oil metering pumps go out, the thing that's responsible for actually injecting the oil into the engine. And there's really no tell sign of when or if those things go out. So if they do, it's a pretty bad thing to happen, as you can imagine. And pre-mixing is one way to just always keep a peace of mind. That way there's always some sort of lubrication being added to the apex seals. Which is also another reason as to why I decided to install the Sewn adapter and support kit onto this car, which was about another $250 piece that I had to buy and install to this car, just as another security measure to make sure that it doesn't destroy itself. Okay, so finding a car that's in good shape may be a little difficult. You might have to pay a little more money than expected, and you're gonna have to work on the car a little more than normal to make sure that it's going to be running healthy and strong. Doesn't sound too terrible. which it's really not if you're prepared and ready for that type of investment. But it doesn't end there, because coming down to actually driving these cars is a little bit of a different task in itself as well. If I were to start this car up and just back it out of the garage here and shut it off, odds are it would probably flood itself, which is another whole process to go through to unflood the engine and get it started again. There's just a different way to drive these cars. You have to let them come up to operating temperature, or flooding is a real issue that you have to deal with. So basically, whenever I know I get into this car and start it up, it's going to be at least 5 minutes for it to come up to operating temperature before I'm comfortable shutting it off again. A red line today keeps the rebuild away is somewhat of a common phrase and a bit of a joke about the RX-8 and Rotaries in general. And while, yeah, it sounds really fun to go redline your car all the time, when you're just looking to go to like the grocery store, trying to get up to 9,000 RPM in city traffic might not be the easiest thing to do. So a lot of times you don't actually get to do that, and you end up just having to rev the piss out of it, which is still a little bit of fun and I guess not a bad thing. Now with my Mazda RX-8, I installed air suspension on it, which I know a lot of people weren't the most thrilled about when I did it, because Mazda obviously spent a ton of time and money in developing the suspension for these cars. And that can easily be seen in the rear suspension of these cars. If you take a look at the diagram of the rear suspension setup in these cars, you'll see that it is a multi-link suspension setup. There are control arms and trailing arms and sway bars everywhere back there. And unfortunately, it's a bitch to replace, especially if these cars have seen winter or if there's rust buildup. And if you want to upgrade them to something adjustable or maybe more performance related, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. Those pieces are pretty expensive, and there's a lot of pieces to replace. Speaking of upgrading the suspension, or just upgrades in general, let's talk about the aftermarket capabilities of the Mazda RX-8. Overall, I would say it's pretty good, but not great. There are a good amount of options for things like the appearance and the overall exterior of the car and things like your exhausts and intakes, but outside of that, you're not going to be finding anything that's really adding a ton of power to these cars. The reason being is that Mazda really did kind of get all of it from the factory, which usually doesn't happen a whole lot. They squeezed as much horsepower as they could out of this little 1.3 liter Renesas rotary engine. And unfortunately, it just doesn't leave much room to grow. Even though the Renesas engine is classified as a 13B rotary engine because it's a 1.3 liter, just like the RX-7 with a turbocharger on it, a lot of people think they can just slap a turbo kit on this and they have, an RX-7 with an extra set of doors on it, when unfortunately that's not the case. The Renesas engine isn't as capable of holding boost as some of the older rotary engines like your FD RX-7. So even if you had the money to spend on a turbo kit for these cars, you might not get as much as you're actually expecting out of it, and who knows how long it's actually going to last. All said and done, you're not gonna make a ton of great power out of the Renesas engine unless you spend a ton of money on it. And I guess you can't have a video talking about some of the downsides of owning a Mazda RX-8 unless you talk about the eventual rebuild that you're going to have to go through if you're owning this car long term. Now, it truly is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when these cars need a rebuild. It's just how they are, and you have to be ready for that. You have to accept that. And a lot of people compare us to like the Subaru guys, but I don't know if it's exactly the same. You guys can fight about it down in the comments below, but I think it's a little bit different. That might just be the rotary arrogance, I don't know. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that when is really going to depend on how these cars were treated in their past life. Because I've seen engines go out at 60,000 miles, I've seen them go out at 100,000 miles. Shit, I've seen people running a stock engine at over 150,000 miles with no issues. So it really does come down to a bunch of different factors, and each RX-8 is gonna be a little bit different. So after all that, you might be looking at me wondering, why the hell did I decide to go pick up a Mazda RX-8? My answer simply is because I wanted to experience a new platform, and I wanted to experience something that I haven't experienced before. The RX-8 and the rotary platform in general is something that's always intrigued me, and honestly, I don't mind getting my hands on a car. I don't mind working on it a little bit more than a normal vehicle. I went into it fully expecting that there might be a rebuild a year down the line, that I might not be able to drive the car for a while, but I was totally okay with that because I wanted to experience something new. So when people come asking me, would you recommend an RX-8 for a daily? Probably wouldn't be my first choice, is because, I do have another vehicle to get me everywhere I need to go outside of this car. This is not my daily. I have a designated daily. This is a fun car. And I guess the last thing I have for you to keep in mind if you're looking to get a Mazda RX-8 is that you gotta be ready for all the Apex Seal and Rotary and oil jokes that everyone's gonna throw at you. You just gotta take it with a grain of salt, smile and nod, and continue on with your day and enjoy your little screaming Rotary. So with all that, if you're still sold on getting a Mazda RX-8, welcome to the club, welcome to the family. I hope you can find one that works well for you, and hopefully you can drive that thing as long as you want. So if I were to wrap all that up in a short little summary for the end here, you have to find a passion for this car and this engine platform in general. And you have to take things as they come your way. Take it step by step, because you never know what the car is really gonna throw at you, and at the end of the day, you have to be okay with that. But they are unlike any other car out there, and they truly are a blast to drive. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and leave a comment down below on whether or not you're picking up an RX-8 sometime in the near future. And if you are, I wish you the best of luck. And if you're not, that's all right too. I'm Gels, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.